Why is DeAndre Swift one of the most confusing players in fantasy football? That and more this week on the couch. So pleased to be joined for the first time, certainly not the last, by fellow Yinzer and a soul brother, Dustin Scott Royer. Dustin, why is DeAndre Swift keeping you up at night right now?
DeAndre Swift seems to be for me at least, the hardest start sit decision on a weekly basis. He has that floor where he's an RB2. I believe in Ben Johnson, but this offense is spin the crap wheel. Is it red, black, or which way is it going to go? And I know a lot of people are dealing with a lot of injuries, a lot of crazy stuff. I'm looking at some of these teams with Brock Bowers, Malik Neighbors, CD Lamb. I lost in 3 weeks of a combined 11 points, and it's because of a start, a sit, or a not
Yeah,
start sit with DeAndre Swift. Um, I think week 4 is coming and we're going to find some clarity, but I think we have a lot to look back on here over the first 3 weeks.
we do. And, it's nice. It's convenient for us when the results match the trends or the trends are continuous and stair step. But then sometimes these teams throw us curveballs. Now let's talk about Swift a little bit more because actually, I would say that if anything, he's probably a buy low. And you're right, though. You're right to narrow it down, Dustin, to start sit because you know there are some running backs that are emerging. Right during the show, we're going to talk about. It's pretty eventful in fantasy football when we have a turnover in all of these backfields all at once, including guys like Jordan Mason, who also is a clear start now. So it makes it harder for the decisions about these running backs. However, um, the Bears offense, I mean, I think one of the biggest stories from the first 3 weeks we have to look back on, as you mentioned, is that it's going well with Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams. And it's getting better each week in a way that suggests that it's going to continue to get better. And at some point, that's going to open things up for DeAndre Swift or whoever the running back is. Maybe this is a Kyle Monungai take because another thing we learned in Chicago is that, well, Roshan Johnson, even now that he's healthy over the foot issue from the summer, he's active, but he's not really getting on the field. But the other layer of the Bears offense, like you said, with the crapshoot is now Luther Burden is making plays, right? We've got DJ Moore, we've got Roma Dunze, who's the number one, and he's the one that you can count on. But I would say against the Raiders, this is probably a week that you contort yourself to figure out how to get Swift in your lineup. Uh, but at the same time, uh, it could continue to be that crapshoot. So when we look at how the Bears also could change before the show, Dustin, by the way, if you don't know Dustin's work, you don't follow him, you should. Really great stuff at all 22 underscore FF. Follow him and check it out. And that's perfect with the 22 in the background. So when we look at the Bears and that surplus of wide receivers and that lack of an impact player in the backfield, you had an interesting idea that we talked about before the show.
Yeah, so the NFL is always about those backdoor relationships, the handshakes. I learned this stuff from you, the dynamics in the locker room. And I just have this feeling that Ben Johnson potentially and Aaron
Aaron Glenn, yeah.
Aaron Glenn, with their connection from working with the Lions, there could be a trade in the works, maybe like a Brees Hall for a DJ Moore and a piece. Um, I was looking into Brees Hall recently. He's had an above 90, or excuse me, 60% snap share all 3 weeks. He had 19 attempts in week 1, then down to 10, down to 9. And half of his points have been a result of the receptions. And I feel like we fell in love with that 2023 spam targets from a backup quarterback narrative with Brees Hall. And I know that Braylon Allen hasn't exactly produced yet, but it felt like Aaron Glenn really put his stamp on this team in the beginning, and it doesn't seem like they're playing the way that he would want to. So it could really be like a culture move for both teams. And New York desperately needs a wide receiver too. With that being a Ben Johnson offense as well, they need like a flanker that can block, like a Cooper Cup, somebody like that, because they run those condensed formations. So this trade deadline, we could really see a lot of activity, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought up DJ Moore too, because sometimes doing what we do, Dustin, sometimes someone will come into my mentions and they'll say, "Oh, yeah, this was last week. I wish I could remember who said this. Should I pick up Luther Burden with the DJ Moore trade rumors?" And immediately I'm like, "DJ Moore trade rumors? I'm not. I haven't heard anything." But oftentimes, if it's just out there, like there's a thing like urban legends are true, even if the actual facts of the story aren't true. The fact that people want to tell that story and it maps to something that they feel or something that that it's to them, it's a way to explain something, does reveal something about these dynamics. And the fact that people were looking at the Bears offense and thinking, DJ Moore, is DJ Moore a guy, especially with Roma Dunze as the apple of the coach's eye and the quarterback's eye? And then you mentioned Brees Hall's that expiring asset. And we can go back to oftentimes the clues, the foreshadowing is there, but so we're in the washing machine of a season, and it just every week we're constantly trying to look back and interpret what just happened, apply it to predicting what's going to happen at the end of the week, and then get ready to do that over again. So Brees Hall and the trade rumors about him going all the way back to the draft and before the draft, and you're right to highlight the connection between Glenn and Ben Johnson, or otherwise when we look for those kinds of moves or try to anticipate them. So I think and what this would be would almost be like pulling the plug out of the stopper in terms of unleashing some value for DJ Moore, unleashing some value for Brees Hall, and maybe DeAndre Swift, that guy that we always are not quite sure about, could be one of the big losers here. But certainly, some things to look forward to potentially with these offenses. Okay, so let's talk about some of these new running backs, or maybe one that I think is the most difficult one to prognosticate, because we can look at Benson and Hampton and Scadaboo, and we know what we have, but we don't quite know what we have with Trayvon Henderson. This is a player. The buzz was so positive. The idea of him coming in and being almost like a Jahmyr Gibbs kind of playmaker in year one for this offense, and it just hasn't happened yet. Now we had Ramondre Stevenson and Antonio Gibson fumble twice for Stevenson, once at the 2-yard line. So Trayvon Henderson, do we feel like, again, in these tough start sit decisions against Carolina this week, are we erring on the side of putting him in our lineup?
When I was thinking about who the most polarizing player was with DeAndre Swift, Travion was right there neck and neck with him. Um, I tried to keep my Ohio State bias to the side through rookie season and everything. But I'm not gonna lie, just like a lot of people, I took Travion. I saw the Jahmyr Gibbs. I saw the athleticism. I heard something recently that said he's kind of just going through his rookie yips kind of thing. I mean, the one thing that we heard over and I saw in film over and over with Travion, he was great in the blocking game. He was great at protecting, and that seems to be where he's struggling a bit. I thought personally, I didn't really believe in Ramondre. I didn't really believe in Gibson, but I thought there would be a succession where at least Ramondre would hold out a couple games. Maybe Gibson would get brought in because he has a better dual skill set like Travion does. There wouldn't be as many tells because it seemed like in the first couple weeks, the defense could tell, like, okay, run with Ramondre. They're going to pass the ball or run outside zone with Travion. But then both Gibbs and Ramondre Stevenson are notorious for fumbling the football. So now we're really pressed into a situation where, everything in fantasy football that I've ever learned, it's about volume at the running back position. But how do we trust Josh McDaniels? So it's very up in the air. I would say What do you know what time they play this week? I didn't look into it.
Yeah, I mean, it's in Foxborough, so I'm assuming it's an early game.
Early game. See, he would be somebody I would love to have in my flex and really kind of
Exactly.
see how the day went. But if they're running an early game, I, I would have to go with maybe a more floor option, unless you're going up against your opponent, you're looking at the projections, and you really think you need a home run. The thing with Travion, I think, is he just needs to get on the field. They need to see an explosive player too, and they need to see him really dig in and protect that Drake May. That's really
Yeah,
what it comes down to. They don't want to let Drake May get Joe Burrowed, unfortunately.
yeah, that's the problem, right? I mean, there's certain things. Dustin, um, and I know from conversations you and I have had off the air that you're a spiritual person and you reflect a lot and you think about matters of the soul. And so many of these seemingly frivolous questions in fantasy football do come down to questions we are on the couch of human psychology or biases or traps we fall into. Adam Harstad, who I want to say big ups to my man Adam Harstad, a fellow football guy, a true real genius, and his family as we got to stay at their place in Chicago in the Hancock Building. I've never stayed up on the 60th floor. It's weird to look out your window and see the tops of other very tall buildings, but these biases and one of the things I think that trips us up in fantasy football, and I've written an article in the past, I should bring it back, Dustin, that's like how optimism can help you as a fantasy football player, right? Like being willing to see positive potential realities and evolution. We talked about the Bears offense with the arrow pointing up, right? Like it's going to get better. And what's that going to release? But when we talked about the Drake May experience and we saw how good he was, right? Drake May and Caleb Williams both in subpar surroundings in a rookie year. Caleb Williams said, well, it was the subpar surroundings. Drake May said, wow, he actually looked pretty good despite the subpar surroundings. New England spruces everything up around him, and we think this is going to be better. And they actually even had some matchups early in the season that at least Miami thought, okay, things are the Raiders. It should have been better. Pittsburgh, it should have been better because, like you said, Drake May, this help isn't really helping him, and because of that, it's harder to be optimistic about Trayvon Henderson. And like you said, I think you put it perfectly when you said that you would really rather plug him in as a flex because he wasn't that successful when he came in and ran the ball. Steelers run defense firming up a little bit with the rookie Derek Harmon in there last week, first NFL game. And like, if you're Mike Vrabel, are you really going to say like, okay, what we're releasing Ramondre Stevenson? Like, we're just not going to, or we're going to have him on the roster, but I'm specifically not going to use him to make a point about his fumbling. I mean, he's going to get worked back into the backfield, and that three-headed backfield is going to stay intact. So I'm looking at Trayvon Henderson as a sell high. Let's talk about some of the other new starters, whether they're sell high or buckle up. And I mean, this is a Marion Hampton is a sell high where like, hey, this is kind of fun. Here's a kind of fun thought, Dustin. Maybe you use O'Marion Hampton as a stepping stone to a Derrick Henry or Jonathan Taylor or Saquon Barkley. Jonathan Taylor would be tough to get. Saquon Barkley you might be able to get right now. Where you say like Hampton plus or something like that. I mean, is he that kind of sell high, or do you think, hey, with Justin Herbert, again, same idea as the Bears, with Justin Herbert loosening everything up because he's gunning out there, is that going to make it so that a Marion Hampton actually, in the end, could be worth more than a Saquon Barkley this year?
So, my initial read with O'Marion Hampton on film, at least, I saw a lot of what I saw with Trey Benson the season before. The competition level in the ACC, it might be the lowest in the Power Four. And we saw with Benson last year, he kind of struggled with the speed of the game. Those first couple games with Hampton, if you look at the run charts, his outside runs, they looked like a bow when you
Mm-hmm.
looked at the field. Game number two, I kind of saw it seemed like he was shying away from contact, hugging the ball, worried about fumbling. I figured he would be more of like your traditional second half of the year league winner. We kind of saw Najee getting worked in there. Harbaugh and Roman are notorious for their splits, even with first round running backs going all the way back to Frank Gore and Carlos Hyde way back in the 49ers days. But Hampton is skilled enough. It seemed almost like as soon as Najee went down and he knew he was the guy, it was on for him. He needs the volume. And I looked at the ESPN charting this last time, and he's getting straight to the outside. And they were running a lot more gap concepts in the middle, so he didn't have to look around and use vision and hop and all this other stuff. He just got through the hole and he went. Sometimes it takes a half a season for these guys to go from realizing they were the most athletic guy since they were 14 years old, that the 350-pound D tackle in front of me is probably the fastest guy, the best player I've ever played against in my entire life.
Yeah.
And we saw it with what, a 90-yard touchdown run on a field goal block. Mm-hmm. So I would be holding Hampton for now. If you really are itching to try to sell high on him, I would give it at least one more game, because it just feels so much like 2017 Alvin Kamara,
Yeah.
and I regretted trading him ever since.
Yeah, well, and the fair thing is you broke down Hampton's game, and why I wasn't as high on Hampton as others is he's just a linear back. I think with Josh Norris, who always has gems of wisdom, saying he's Latavius Murray. And it's the same thing with Trayvon Henderson. When Matt Waldman threw out the Jerick McKinnon comparison, I remember before injuries, San Francisco brought in Jerick McKinnon to be a starter. I mean, he was pretty highly regarded, but not someone you remember as like a fantasy football league winner, first round pick. And that was kind of how I thought of Hampton. And it's just so fantasy football is so mercurial and senseless. I just keep going back to that word, because even early in the game last week, Najee Harris was outplaying him. Najee Harris looked like the better running back at this time for what the Chargers were doing. But you brought up a really important point, and I think this is one of the most underrated things, Dustin, in fantasy football, in a way that an area that can be mined for analytical value and predictive value. When you see how Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman have leaned into Justin Herbert, and how, as I've talked extensively, we are on the couch, about Jim Harbaugh's psyop to really get Justin Herbert to realize, like, you are great with a capital G. That stuff isn't that Jim Harbaugh is a loony. He knows exactly what he's doing, and then build that offense around Justin Herbert. You're trusting. I trust this coaching staff. Look what they've done with Quentin Johnston. Look what they've done now, like you said, giving Marion Hampton less to think about at that early part of his career. And then that size, speed, and the ruggedness in his game start to come out. And as a receiver, he was a pretty accomplished receiver at North Carolina. So you're probably right. You're probably right, not because of Marion Hampton, but because of the Chargers and how competent they are. And you're right to say maybe one more game, because it's the Giants. It's a team that's floundering right now. And it wouldn't be shocking to see him have his 2 or 3 touchdown game. So, yeah, at this point, I'm almost saying I trust the Chargers coaching staff. It's also, by the way, I think you could get your trade offers out there for Lad McConkey. I,
One more thing, real
yeah.
quick, on
Mm-hmm.
Harbaugh and Roman. They are historically one of the most predictable and consistent coaching and offensive coordinator tandems also. I mean, you could go all the way back to San Diego University, Stanford 49ers. They consistently have done the same thing. And I made a joke about this, but it's so true. Basically, all the best teams in the league are running the Nevada offense that Harbaugh ran way back in the day with Colin Kaepernick, the Russian quarterback, the zone game, everything. You got Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, you can make the whole list. So arguably, I mean, it was all there. And I will say, I will take my L's. I traded Justin Herbert on a dynasty team 2 days before the NFL draft because he had no weapons, and I had a ton of Lad McConkey, and now I have no Justin Herbert, a ton of Lad McConkey, and we're just holding on, as you'd like to say, Sick.
Yeah, well, and with McConkey, he's just too good. I know there's this biceps thing. I don't think it's. I mean, I hope it's nothing, but it's going to come. It's going to come. And I think that is, if there's something like the marathon through a minefield, I think everybody can feel it out there. Like week 3 was just such a bizarre week in fantasy football in the NFL that it just was disorienting. But I think that's a feature, not a bug, where there's so much variance. Love My Life Kate is doing that team in the Dennis League. She put Dak Prescott in last second switch over Jalen Hurts. I was like, the fantasy gods don't like that. And instead, they just gave her a soft tap on the lesson as she was able to win because Zay Flowers didn't do anything. Again, some of the stuff where we said, oh, the variance for Zay Flowers, we're ironing that out after 2 weeks. He didn't even get one of the 4 touchdowns against the Browns. Maybe not. And that's one of the things that with fantasy football and like life,
By Isaiah Likely everywhere.
I still like Isaiah Likely a ton. I just hope that the foot
I'm there.
doesn't. Yeah, well, I really thought going into the season, I expected the extension to get done. He's really a player that I think has been so under the radar because he comes in from Coastal Carolina. And the funny thing is, the 2 players that are linked, I love this stuff. The Steelers take Calvin Austin, and the Ravens had Calvin Austin circled, and that was the guy they had like what? Didn't they have like 6 4th-round picks? I don't even remember. They had already taken Charlie Kolar, another tight end. And how many times are we going to have 2 tight ends in the same draft, and the second one's better? Well, I mean, it just happens again and again and again. It's happened like 3 times to the Ravens alone because Isaiah Likely, they're like, well, I guess let's just take Isaiah Likely, who at that time was thought of as an offensive weapon. He comes in as a rookie and immediately gets playing time because of his blocking. And
Exactly.
and he is, I think, one of the only players in that offense that he's a red zone threat. He can work the middle of the field. He can get downfield. He's a run after catch threat. And his best football is still ahead of him. But Mark Andrews, after 2 weeks, I thought, yep, just exactly as I expected. Mark Andrews, a lot of negative buzz. He can't really influence the game. And then the Ravens come out and focus on him early in the game. And then he gets a garbage time touchdown to really blow things up. So we'll see if Likely's back. But if he's not back this week against Kansas City, then Andrews becomes a good start. So some of these confusing situations, Dustin, a confusing situation. How about Michael Pennix? Because 3 games last year, first 2 games this year, I saw a stat through 2 games. No, he was the only quarterback with no turnover worthy plays. Wow, that's what you want from a young quarterback, right? Take care of the ball. Last year we saw him in a game that was a shootout against Carolina to end the season. Drake London's going to be massive this year. Uh, but then we see him play a game last week against Carolina that looks like he just like forgot how to play football, right? Like it's the game that everybody who said that was the worst pick in the draft whenever they took Michael Penix number 8. Like that's the game that they're like, see. Um, this week it should get better with Washington, who already had a poor pass defense, 4 injuries in their secondary last week, and they already had a very poor pass defense. You saw how easy it was for Jordan Love. Um, so is this that moment that, hey, everything's going to be fine? Penix just had a little hiccup, or we lost some confidence in him and in turn his targets after what we saw in week 3.
I think maybe there's a larger scope just issue with the way we as a collective look at prospects. I think we've been spoiled in the post-COVID NIL era where I have this theory that the COVID class that came out, they were basically like the pilot for NIL. School got shut down. Everybody was getting money from the government. All of a sudden, they weren't eating ramen noodles anymore. They could take care of themselves. They could exercise. And then we get spoiled with prospect after prospect. We get Jamar Chase, we get Jefferson, we get these guys. Then we get this final culmination, I feel like, from that era of all these quarterbacks. And the NFL, it's, how do you say it, Sig? It's the greatest story
The great
of
American
the,
novel.
The Great American Novel. There you go. And so it feels just so right, right? You got a Netflix documentary, Kirk Cousins, rookie comes off the bench, and we run out of stuff to do in the off season, and we start to look at 3 games, 3 games, 3 games. But if you scope out, like Darnell Mooney was injured, he didn't practice all camp, right? Kyle Pitts has been said to elevate his game. Not saying that they didn't rely on Pitts, but if the stories are coming out about how much better he's doing than expected and the role has changed like that, it's a lot like we were talking about before. Like, I never want to look back at a broken offensive system and point to that and look at the outlier and say that's what we should expect. You know,
Mm.
it's the Mac Jones, Brian Thomas Jr. corollary from last year. So I just think we need to take a step back. You know, I know it's not the best thing you want to hear. I mean, with Pennix, we're probably talking mostly super flex type leagues, anyways. He's probably on the waiver wire in your traditional 12-team leagues. But I just think, you know, the preseason shorter than ever, the practice reps are shorter than ever. They're trying to marry a very physical run game with Bijan Robinson, a downfield passing game, and you know their intermediate weapon, Darnell Mooney, who is a really great receiver. He doesn't get nearly as much credit as he should for how he played in Chicago. So I just think it's a matter of like calming down. I just really hope we don't get into a Kirk Cousins, um, Michael Penix negative
Mhm.
feedback loop here where it's just up and down, up and down.
No, you're right, and the only thing that gives me some confidence that that won't happen. I mean, look at Michael Penix has to play better, or it'll happen just by natural consequences. But and I think he will. I mean, the reason I would overall say, you know, Drake London. You bring up a good one. Darnell Mooney's a great what the heck flex this week, coming off of 2 drops. He's a professional. He's a total professional. You know, this is going to be a week against that Washington secondary that Darnell Mooney could make a big impact. Because Washington's offense is good enough that Atlanta can't go into a shell like they did against Minnesota, and Brian Flores kind of encouraged them to. And I thought that was because Brian Flores was respecting Michael Penix, playing 2 high safeties in the second half, and the Atlanta saying, "Well, we'll just keep running at that," and we were pleased to do that. But they're not going to be able to do that against Washington. And Penix does play at the edge of his abilities, and like you said, there's still a ramp up, and there's just a lot of mistakes that aren't the kind of mistakes you saw him make on tape a lot. And I think it is going to get better against Washington. And I think what was promising about week 1 against Tampa, who takes away the run, was that Penix made the plays. You know, he kept them in the game in a way that made it maybe seem like he's ahead of schedule. But it's funny, Dustin, how when we look at that class of quarterbacks last year, the one who comes out smelling the sweetest right now, like we talked about earlier with the Bears, Caleb Williams, when he was one with had some of the biggest questions, but Ben Johnson and his tough love uh, making things happen. And maybe the Bears, it's a team I should start to classify like the Chargers. Like I trust the coaches. Um, so, and I loved, by the way, going back to that, you brought up the San Diego Toreros. That's a draft guy's TV alum, Josh Johnson, who I think is still in the league. So I think it could be a bounce back week for Pennix and Drake London. And like you said, relax, calm. What about another quarterback from that class? Uh, Bo Nix. The plays were there. Sean Payton drew up the plays. Everybody executed but Bo Nix. It's a Monday night game. It's Cincinnati. I mean, if he doesn't get right, it's kind of like Penix. If you can't get right against this defense, then something's wrong.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. I feel almost like Bo Nix and Sean Payton are trying to make him the Drew Brees joystick quarterback. And as you like to say, he needs to be playing on the edge of his ability. You know, anytime I feel like I see a quarterback who gives us his best in the quick game, 2 minutes left before the end of the half, drive down the field, 30-yard touchdown to Cortland Sutton, but then they struggle in those gotta have it scripted, you know, parts of the game like that. I just feel like maybe it's just an over management thing. I feel like maybe the fact that they got to the playoffs and lost might have been a bad thing last year. Like maybe if they would have just barely missed the playoffs, they would have came back with that right edge. I'm not really sure. I just feel like kind of Bo Nix feels almost like a Joe Burrow where he needs to come out. He needs to always be the underdog. He needs to root against himself because everybody's rooting against him type guy. And then he almost reminds me of like a Philip Rivers. He can just elevate to that moment every time.
Yeah, that is the script for this week. I mean, certainly Denver's 1-2, and as Cecil put it on the show, like they could be 3-0, they could be 0-3. So what are they? And certainly against Cincinnati. And you brought up a good point, by the way. I want to circle back to this since we're talking about Cincinnati. Uh, that you don't necessarily want to bank in things that are emanating from a broken situation, right? I called it like struggle targets, like it's because like Jonnu Smith with Miami last year, right? It was smoke. That's like smoke coming out of the hood. Some might say Brenton Strange in Jacksonville having the numbers he's had so far is like smoke coming out of the hood. It's not working the way it's supposed to, like you said. And Mac Jones, who by the way is proving himself to be a better. Mac Jones sure looks like a guy. Speaking of superflex leagues, it's going to get a shot to start somewhere down the line. The way he's playing, especially with the proliferation of the Shanahan McVay offense and how he's showing that he can be the driver there. But there are definitely things that you look at fantasy spikes that are based on things that are somewhat temporary because it's just an adjustment to something that the team doesn't really want to be happening, right? So let's talk about the Kansas City offense because nobody could watch Kansas City's offense and say that's what they meant to do. I mean, you can say Xavier Worthy's hurt and Roshi Rice is suspended, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But, how can we turn this into fantasy advice? Another confusing situation and something, as you put it, that is broken.
Whew. Right before the season kicked off, I had went on FFPC with Eric Balkman, and I had talked about my concerns with Kansas City, and the analogy I came up with, it'd be like that old Mustang you have, but the body's held together with duct tape. It's going to get you there. The ride's going to be great, but you hit any bump in the road, it might fall apart. And, Xavier Worthy got injured. Hollywood Brown's been banged up since camp. Unfortunately, it looks like Kelsey's washed, and we're getting a hero ball season out of Patrick Mahomes. It's been a couple years since he's really been super relevant. He's really like performed up to ADP from like a wins above replacement level. But I don't think Rashid Rice is going to be enough just coming back. I mean, we're all hoping for Rashid Rice. I think that would definitely be one of the first players I would try to trade for if we get to week 4, week 5 in Dynasty, and it's looking like you need to hit the reload button.
Mm-hmm.
Always buy those injured assets that are on the bounce back. Generally, that's the way I go. But Tyquan Thornton might actually be a thing. They can't continue to jam Worthy down the field. So I've been working. I'm new at this. I've been trying to figure my way out and figure my process out. And one of the things I added a year ago was 2.7 BMI minimum for a wide receiver. And if you look at Tank Dell, you look at Xavier Worthy, Hollywood Brown's on the same team as him, the risk of injury just goes up exponentially because, we hear dislocated ankle Chris Godwin, and people think like, oh, just jam your thumb back in, you're fine, and it's his whole leg fell off. So these guys are always injured. Even when they're healthy, they're injured. So yeah, I mean, Thornton just brings that element that they've been missing. He's a lot bigger body than he looks like, but he's a developmental guy. And one of the things I was trying to get to with the whole COVID class and the NIL thing is, the NFL is a square circle. It just goes in circles, and I'm getting a little bit older now, and we're getting back to draft and develop. There's not going to be a Malik Neighbors you can draft next year. There's not always going to be a Jamar Chase. There's not going to be the next Saquon Barkley or Ashton Genty every year. And that's really what we're starting to see with these teams. I think maybe the compensatory pick system has something to do with it too, because they have more capital to throw around. They can like waste spots on international players or something. But Mahomes just seems like he won't be denied this year. And who else is going to contribute in the offense? I had very high hopes for Jalen Royals. I thought he could slide right in and fill that void over the middle, but he has just not been able to get on the field.
He came in with a knee issue. He is healthy enough now. That's a good name to keep in mind. It's a bit of a hurdle in Andy Reid's offense teams for rookies to get big roles, but he had the preseason camp buzz that would make it seem not that surprising if he did. But I want to first emphasize Tyquan Thornton, because I think, and I'm, one of my whatever hot takes this week or something, I want Thornton over Trey Tucker on the waiver wire, even though Trey Tucker had will be one of the 3 or 5 best games. And who knows, maybe Geno Smith will just keep gunning for Trey Tucker against all logic. But some of that's that Brock Bowers is a little banged up. Get your trade offers in for Brock Bowers too. But Tyquan Thornton, should have had 2 touchdowns last week. But he's the guy, like you said, it's almost like Mahomes has been, caged or penned up by the adjustment to the 2 high safeties, take away, and he would take what the defense gave him, and they're a defensive team. And like you said, for fantasy, it's been limp, and he's been dropping a little further each year, maybe to the point where it's palatable. Although he didn't do much as a runner against the Giants, you still saw him with the limited targets he had taking those shots downfield. And Thornton's the guy that matches that aggressiveness. He's the guy that can harvest that aggressiveness. You were also right to bring up with Rice, though. This is these are such straightforward things in fantasy football. Look at the team that drafted Roshy Rice in your redraft league. Are they 0-3 right now? Make an offer. I mean, you never know. But Tyquan Thornton, I think, should be a priority. I can't help it. I'm fascinated with Brashard Smith, Dustin. I'm fascinated.
Yes.
I just said it's hard for a rookie to make an impact, but geez, it feels like he should. Are you fascinated?
I've been fascinated with Brashard Smith since I logged into the rookie film room and started watching film back in March. He is just such a dynamic receiver and runner of the football. I did just hear recently someone say that there's like whispers coming out of Kansas City that maybe they just don't think he's physical enough. Maybe they don't think he can hold up. But I mean, Mahomes absolutely does not want to get hit in the backfield. If they can't get a running game going, I mean, their only solution in the past was the Jet McKinnon rule. But without Worthy and him coming back with a shoulder injury, I saw everybody getting so excited last week when he was potentially going to play. But we just have to keep in mind we could very well be looking at a T. Higgins is starting, playing 2 snaps, falls on his leg, and he's a 0 in your lineup situation. So that again would be something that I would desperation flex. I need upside if he's going to start. It's early in the week now, but just keep that in mind. But Brashard Smith's another guy, man. I feel like there's so many of these running backs that just need the opportunity to get on the field. And once they can show their athleticism, once they can prove that they understand what's going on, that they're going to show in the NFL, and then that's going to translate to fantasy points. I mean, I've been all in on Brashard Smith. I have so much Brashard
Me
Smith it
too.
makes me sick.
Oh no, me too. And I mean, everywhere I could get him. I mean, he was because, like you said, it's the dynamism, it's it's the landing spot that specifically has a role for his very unique skill set. That was unbelievable. Jerick McKinnon was a league winner. Post injury, Jerick McKinnon was league winner. What could a player with burst and agility, and he does have the competitive toughness. I mean, maybe his frame isn't necessarily, but this is like a Devin Achane kind of situation where he's a tough player. He's not going to shy away from
Right.
contact. Like, I'm looking at Brashard Smith as a priority pickup. One of these weeks, like you said, especially, you know what, especially it is, you want to look thin and young, hang around with old fat people. Sorry, I'm not saying anything specific about Kareem Hunt and Isaiah Pacheco. And Pacheco had that one mistake, and whenever people let this go viral, where he like turned the wrong way so that Mahomes has to throw a backward pass, it almost ends up being a defensive touchdown. That's the kind of stuff. Like, you better be adding a lot of value if you're going to make mistakes like that. So, and not saying that Brashard Smith won't make a mistake like that, but after watching Kareem Hunt and Isaiah Pacheco get carries, when Brashard Smith is out there, you're going to rub your eyes because it's going to be so different. And I know the Chiefs know this because on the one good play Travis Kelce had this year, that long touchdown, the decoy on that play on the screen was Brashard Smith. So they used Brashard Smith's athleticism as an influence to free up Travis Kelce to run down the field unchecked. So they know. I absolutely think Brashard Smith's a player to watch. Okay, one last fantasy thing, because I said last week, sell all of your Bengals. Now, if you do sell your Bengals, now you're going to sell them for less than you would have got last week. But is this offense a falling knife, or is it just that Brian Flores, man? I mean, he's going to torment quarterbacks that he feels like he's going to sweep the leg. I saw someone say that 3 of the turnovers were in field goal position, and Minnesota scored like 31 points off. That's a 40-point swing. And that 48-10 doesn't sound so bad. The worst loss in franchise history doesn't sound so bad. But is it a bad idea to hold on to your Bengals?
I think when it comes to Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, you don't really have a choice. I mean, you're going to have to just bet on the talent. Chase Brown is a worry of mine. He was like somebody I play mostly in Dynasty. I do a little bit of redraft here and there, but all the principles are basically the same. So, I sold off my Chase Brown shares and invested a little bit elsewhere. And for me, it really goes back to, like you said, the struggle volume, the struggle targets. So if you look at it a little differently, Joe Burrow, to bet on the Cincinnati offense this year, we had to bet on Joe Burrow recreating the circumstances of what was essentially the most efficient, healthiest season of his and the team's career, essentially. And then we had to duplicate also the performance from the defense on top of that. So that environment, the threat of Burrow, the threat of T. Higgins, the threat of Chase, the all the other pieces, that created an environment for Chase Brown where, even though he is talented, even though he could rip off those runs, he was the last guy on the list. When they're game planning on Sunday, all respect to Chase Brown, but he's not the guy that's highlighted and circled in the film room. And it was just kind of one of those things. You had said it earlier. It's the Wayne Gretzky quote: "Go to where the puck's gonna be, not where it's
Yeah.
at." So I saw the Dak Prescott, CD Lamb, George Pickens thing coming from a mile away. Now here we are in a different circumstance. But you could see the results. Javonte Williams, that environment creates, if you just have an above replacement level player that's assignment sound that can get you just a little bit over expected, that's going to breed success. But yeah, I would not be selling low on Jamar Chase. I would not be selling low on T. Higgins. I mean, if you can make a move like a T. Higgins for a Tet McMillan, somebody on the way up, while maybe he's going to kind of stay where he's at, I wouldn't expect Jamar Chase to be top 5, maybe like sneak in. Higgins is probably more like a low end wide receiver too, unless we see some things change. But Chase Brown's going to be a sit for me unless, again, I mean, if you invested in him in fantasy draft at a certain point, you might just have to play him. But hopefully you have some of these later round running backs that are ascending off your bench, like a Cam Scatterbo, Woody Marks, somebody like that.
Yeah, Marks is a good one to stash too in that 50-50 committee. But you're right. I mean, well, look, I would still be throwing out like Jamar Chase. I might trade Jamar Chase for Lad McConkey right now. I'm, I, I mean, the point is, like, go ahead.
I have a rule though. I have a rule. So Jamar Chase, Malik Neighbors, CD Lamb, and any sort of
Sure.
interchange within that spectrum, I would maybe go after Neighbors. I mean,
Yeah,
there's
that's
so
fair.
much cloudiness in New York right now. I didn't mean to interrupt you though. Go
No,
ahead,
no,
Sig.
yeah, then that's it. No, this is exactly what we're getting into it. The point is the wheels should be turning as much like when we're in draft mode, Dustin. There are players that like they're either their value is going to continue to fall or it's going to bounce back, but they're not going to stay where they are right now. Like we're going to look back and say after this game against Minnesota, the right move was to buy your Bengals or to sell your Bengals. And I don't think there's going to be one where we say like, they stayed just about where they were because we're all still waiting. Was it just Minnesota? And with Chase Brown, I think you bring up a great point and comparing him to Javonte Williams. And again, it's especially at the running back position, how much of value is based on environment. I think I've called them like frogs. Frogs like absorb everything in their environment. And that is so important. And the Bengals just can't run block. And we don't have a threatening passing game. It doesn't matter. We're going to go off the rails a little bit early. Again, all 22 underscore FF, Dustin Scott Royer. Does that say spiritual gangster up behind you?
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely.
Yes, yes, beautiful. My buddy Mike Wilcock, one of my dear friends, one of my roommates in college for a little while, he called me the spiritual collection agency. So it doesn't have quite the same ring as gangster, but yeah, we got some spiritual yinzers up here, and
Right.
I want to hit a spiritual note before we go to off the rails. Really starting off the rails early because I ended with the Bengals, to bring up Rudy Johnson, the news this morning, and every time this hits, man, Marion Barber hit me hard. Yeah, I got to meet Marion Barber. I didn't get to meet Rudy Johnson, but so many players are dying too young, and I believe the initial report was suicide. It just happened right before we went on the air. But one of the things I think that makes this game so compelling and why we have so much around it. I saw something that said that people second screen the NFL. That's the thing now, Dustin. Like where you watch something and then you have another screen out, and a lot of the second screening stuff is like, well, they're not going to be paying total attention. It's like they want to make content that's not too challenging. But with the NFL, it's the opposite, right? They're using the second screen to drill down even further on the NFL. It's just so compelling. And part of why I think it's so compelling, or maybe the main reason why it's so compelling, is these dudes lay it all out there every week. Like none of us at our jobs understand like this idea that like any day at my job, something that completely alters the rest of my life, like leaves me limping or hurting in a way that I'll remember this moment for the rest of my life. Um, just playing on that razor's edge. And yes, they get the money and the fame and all that stuff, but it's different. I think it's just different than the other sports because of that razor's edge. And I think from a spiritual, psychological standpoint, in addition to physical standpoint, a lot of players leave the game and just end up not in a good state. But how I want to flip that and make that positive, Dustin, as we kind of transition with a football topic to non-football topics, is who is a player that not just the player on the field, but the person that they are, their personality, and you can't separate the two, but what you know about them. Who is a player that brings you joy?
Uh, right now it's got to be Cam Scatabo.
Yeah.
Honestly, it is, and so I make fantasy football content. I analyze fantasy football. Like Sig said, you can find my work on X. I'm also on dynastyrewind.com. We have YouTube and all that. But I have had the reason I said that is because I've had football just trickled throughout my life, through my time. And of all places, my dad, God rest his soul, he lived in a little town called Danville, Pennsylvania. And they are home of the 7-time single A state champion football
Wow.
team. Yeah, right? And number 44 for the New York Giants when I was growing up was Henry Hynoski. He was the state
Mm-hmm.
champion fullback for that team. And
Wow.
yeah, and Cam Scatabo gets drafted, and he picks number 44, and I'm just like, he's everything that every high school running back that was 5'9" and had it all but couldn't get there. It's like there's the ticket. Like he's living out everybody's dream, And I never told you this, Sig. You live in New Orleans. You're a transplanted Saints fan
Yeah.
too. I crossed paths with I can't even talk, man. Bloomsburg University.
Yeah.
Jari Evans, man.
Yes. All time great.
Yeah, right. And so, like, my earliest memories, like, I'm in college, I went in for an early semester. We're outside playing bucket ball, watching Jari get drafted, and now I'm sitting here screaming at my screen so he can get into the Hall of Fame,
Yes.
and there's just all these little connections. But Cam Scatabo, man, it's just if one person was the book, or if one person was the chapter, Cam Scatabo's, you turn the page, this is the new modern old school NFL,
Yeah.
because
Yes. I
that's what
love
it
it.
feels like.
Yeah.
It's like football's 2016 again. And these coaches with these young running backs, they're making them earn it. These guys were wearing 74 and 32, and we're all freaking out. Like they had to earn their numbers. They're earning it on the field. But I feel like we're just on the precipice, like the narratives, the talent, these quarterbacks. It feels like my childhood again. It feels like we're gonna turn the page and it's Drew Brees, Ben
Mhm.
Roethlisberger, Eli Manning, but like this modern version of all of that. Like they say, like the past is doomed to repeat itself, but in the NFL, it's just a cycle because
Right.
they're just chasing each other's tails,
Yeah, they
you
are.
know?
They are. Constant. It's a copycat league, and then they adjust, and then it's a copycat league, and they adjust. But I'm glad that Cam Scatterby was a player that jumped into your mind at that moment, because I think the way he plays and, like you said, the personality to
Yeah.
combine
Let me
in
throw
this
this
way.
out there
Yeah.
because I forgot to say this real quick.
Mhm.
He reminds me of Marshawn Lynch. The way that he attacks, like think of Marshawn Lynch sideways, right? He's sideways flying somewhere like Cam was out there, and that just the energy he brings, the kind of guy he is. Obviously, he's not Marshawn Lynch, but I feel like he has that effect. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Yeah. Well, that makes me think of Ryan Riddle, who I dearly love. Ryan Riddle, who I don't think anybody honestly has done as good of a job as he did in the time that he was writing Bleacher Report, of pulling back the curtain. I remember he wrote articles like what it feels like to be cut on the day, that everyone's getting cut. Again, going back to the human side of this game. And he said tackling, because they were at Cal together, and he said tackling Marshawn Lynch is like trying to tackle a wave. And this Cam Scatterby, I think, has that, and it's just the indomitable, indefatigable energy he brings. And like you said, it's because you watch Scatterby with the lack of lateral agility, or like what he doesn't have to work with athletically, and if you let that define him, you miss. And I missed it because I'm looking at Tyrone Tracy, who was way ahead of schedule last year, and Brian Dable says he's faster, he's quicker, he's bigger, and he did go into the year as the lead back, and I thought, okay, still, Scatterby was going to have his role, but he got hurt. Anyway, so I whiffed on that one. But everybody who took Cam Scatterby because they love the way he plays football, I like to think of that as like a karmic reward. And congratulations to everyone who's harvesting that. And maybe he'll be the best of these running backs, especially if Jackson Dart spruces the place up. Okay, so we kind of bled over into off the rails, but since we're both Yinzers, let's just start there. What do you love about being from this very special and unique part of the world called Western Pennsylvania?
I, man, it's almost indescribable to be honest with you. So I'm from up a little north of here, and I moved down to the city when I was 22 years old. So now I'm 36, and it's just it's I live in like a little village, right? It's in Aliquippa, Pennsylvania, an old steel town. I walk my dogs around the neighborhood. It's a little grid, and I
Mm-hmm.
wave to the people, and you do that. But then you jump in the car, and 30 minutes down the road, there's Heinz Field, there's the
Mm-hmm.
Pittsburgh Pirates, the airport's right there. It's just everything that I really need. It's all here, and you know, no negative to anybody else, But as I grow and I learn and I make mistakes with relationships in this space and I get to know people, one of the things I love about here is you just be who you are.
Exactly.
And people give you the benefit of the doubt. And when you cross the line, then they cut you off, and that's
Yeah.
how you learn your lessons in life. And, I've just been trying to learn, like, especially from you and some other people I really respect, like, how to universally translate what I'm trying to say so it can just be accepted in, because like you said, as a spiritual person, like, I truly believe that we're all connected,
Oh yeah.
and we manifest the reality that we want. Like if we put that positive intention into, be it our hobby here with fantasy football, which plays a much more important role for men nowadays than we like to talk about. Mental health and
Yes.
relationships and a whole nother thing. And I can say that because I started out sitting in a garage on a lawn chair drinking beers, putting stickers on the wall. I feel like everybody should have had to experience that. The guy runs away with the money and then you have
Right.
to start over. Um, but yeah, it's just like that spiritual connectiveness. And I worked in high level corporate sales almost my whole adult life, over a decade. And circumstances changed and I just jumped in full force
Hmm.
doing this. I was decent at it. I'd won some money. I just started clicking buttons. I applied. My username is all22ff because I literally just applied to be a film charter. Had no idea what I was doing. Let them train me, and now that's literally how I do what I do every day. And Joey Wright, shout out Joey Wright from
Yeah.
Football Guys.
Love
He
Joey.
donated an hour of his time, and he sat down and he told me, like, this is what you got to do if you want to do it, And I just think, like, now more than ever, any sort of connectivity that we can have with the outside world and then invite that back into our real life,
Hmm.
like, those are the most important things you can find nowadays.
Yeah, healing yourself, heal the world, heal yourself. There's so much. I can't go over an hour, but you brought, Aliquippa. I have family roots in Aliquippa. Um, it's a special place. I've often said they should study it because it's a steel town now of only about 10,000 people. Its height maybe 30,000 people. Tony Dorsett, Mike Ditka, Sean Gilbert, Ty Law, also Pete Maravich, who's a big figure down here in New Orleans. I mean, how is it that one town
Darrell
produced
Revis.
Darrell Revis? Of course, Darrell Revis. Um, there's something there, but like you said, it's authenticity. And
Yeah.
one of the things I see is a affinity between Pittsburgh and New Orleans. It's just my mom, rest her soul, told me, God rest her soul, like just be who you are. Don't worry about what people think about you because they see who you are anyway. So it just takes, and in Pittsburgh, there's a familiarity and there's a sense of like, why are we even going to waste time trying to pretend for something or make you think something about me that's not true?
Right.
And again, I always pair up those quotes. Kurt Vonnegut says, "We are what we pretend to be, so be careful what you pretend to be." And Mark Twain says, "I always tell the truth, so I don't have to remember what I said. So always just be yourself, and you don't have to keep anything up. And the life, and then the life you're supposed to have will come to you. At least that's the plan. We are all helping each other out through those connections, through that authenticity. As you said, Dustin, more and more, just anything that's real, anything that's human, anything that reminds you of the things that you love about being alive. Uh, that's what that beauty in the world that we want to grow. And Cam Scott be running someone over. That's beautiful, and it was so important. One of the things as I go out, I want to tell people because there's so many tensions right now, and the NFL even is part of that tension, and the organization what it represents, and they get to profit from the love we have. For all of us, our love of football comes back to somebody that we love, somebody that we shared football with at a young age. All of us. So some of the energy we spend following football, some of the energy we spend with our fantasy football teams, take a little piece of that and do something to remember that person or say hi to that person if they're still here with us, because it's always about love here on the Audible. It's always about love on the couch because you're so classy.